Welcome back to this I-24 News Evening Edition. This is the Daily Debate. Well, the European Parliament President Martin Schulz spoke in the Israeli parliament yesterday in German. Well, some members of the Israeli parliament, especially from the right-wing party Habayit Yehudi, claimed that the speech in this language showed a lack of sensitivity for Mr. Schulz, and others made the startling diplomatic choice of walking out. Well, 69 years after the end of World War II, should this even be a subject for debate in the Israeli political arena? And what's the view of most Israelis towards one of Israel's biggest allies today, Germany? Well, joining me is Ulrich Sahm, foreign correspondent for German media. Thank you for joining us here.
Thank you.
And Nadia Ellis, researcher at Tel Aviv University. Thank you as well for being here and joining the daily debate. So, Mr. Sahm, first, I understand that you sat with Martin Schulz before his speech to the parliament.
Oh, yes.
Can you tell us about that?
I had breakfast yesterday morning at the King David Hotel. It was a kind of little press conference with some 10 journalists or so from all kinds of media, German, American, and others, and Israelis. And what surprised me after the speech is that he could have checked if really the Palestinians only get 17 liters of water per day. He did not ask the journalists, which happens frequently with politicians, and they ask, tell us off the record, what do you think, is it true or not?
Off the record, sure, the notorious off the record.
Yes.
Right.
And then, of course, he has his entourage, his spokesman, David Chris, who speaks perfect Hebrew. He could have asked some people who have heard that this cannot be true. So I claim, as he read this speech in writing from paper, that was a well-prepared provocation.
To gain a reaction or to appease some other constituency behind the scenes?
You know, you just mentioned what happened afterwards.
Sure.
Bennett walking out and people saying, how can you say something like that in German, etc. First of all, there have been several German presidents who spoke in German in the Knesset. This subject of not being able to listen or hear German after so many years of good cultural relations, etc., excuse me, but time is gone. Second of all, Mr. Schulz must be very, very thankful to Mr. Bennett.
Okay, in what way? What do you mean by that?
Mr. Schulz is the president of the European Parliament. That is a parliament which cannot pass any laws, which does not have any competence and doesn't really have anything to say. It's quite an unimportant, let's put it so, institution. The European Commission, and he would love to become the commissioner, is much more important.
Provided some clout to Martin Schulz that otherwise he wouldn't have had, you're saying.
Look here, he's not that well known. No. He's not such a profound
I think this incident is probably the first time most people have heard his name, right?
Everybody talks about him. He did a wonderful thing. And, you know, all those, well, there are no more, there's not even one anti-Semite in Germany or in Europe anymore, as you know.
Of course not.
Of course not. Anyhow, there are a lot of people who are, of course, critical of Israel, as they call it, anti-Zionist. And I guess he'll get a lot of votes from them because he was very brave, showing the Israelis the way, and he was pro-Palestinian. So he really should be thankful, grateful.
Nadia, what's your take on this and the reaction? Some of the things that he's putting out there. Interesting take on the incident.
Yeah, I would like to reply to two main points. One, very shortly, the fact whether it's acceptable or not that someone stands up and walks out of the room when somebody speaks German. Just a minor point, it's not relevant whether I believe it's a good choice or not to walk out. I don't think anyone can claim time has passed. When we're talking about the Holocaust, I don't think there's any notion such as time has passed. And it will never be enough time for what happened.
It comes across as an ignorant gesture, does it not?
Again, I don't want to say whether I think it was smart or not, but I wouldn't judge the sensitivity of people concerning the German language. And this is one point, but the main point is the reason why he mentioned this claim on water without actually verifying it. I'm a discourse analyst, and what we do is we analyze speeches and we try to find the messages that are conveyed by the speech, but in a way that is not open. Now, I have analyzed this speech because I wanted to understand how come a person mentions a claim which is not verified, and he even admits it's not verified in such a context, such as the Knesset.
In front of a parliament,
In
right.
front of a parliament, yes. I will make it short, but Schultz makes a parallelism in his speech all the way between the Jews and the Palestinians. The Jews, their right to self-determination, and their dream of fulfilling that self-determination in Israel, especially after what happened in Europe. And in his speech, it is extremely clear that the reason why the Jewish people had a right to self-determination in Israel is because of the horrors it passed in Europe. Now, once he moves to the Palestinians, and he needs to justify their right to self-determination because he says it's their dream and it's their right to live in a state, in a viable democratic state, he needs, in the same way, to justify their right to self-determination. And if it's not through the suffering, which is the same way he justified the Jews, if it's not through the suffering of the Palestinians, then how? And this is how he justifies their suffering. And he makes examples very clearly: the water, the blockade on Gaza, the settlements. He has no. He makes it very, very clear that the Palestinians are entitled to their state because of the suffering they are having. And
well, Mr. Sahm, I sense some discontent in your disagreement here.
No, it's unbelievable what you're saying, because what you're telling us, showing us from your analysis, that is pure anti-Semitism. That's classical European Semitism, by diminishing the Holocaust with the 6 million killed, etc., and comparing Israel actually to the Nazis.
He's very careful not to diminish the Holocaust. He talks a lot about responsibility at the beginning of his speech, and the responsibility of Germany and his own responsibility as a German. But this responsibility, he shifts it onto Israel very, very clearly. And the way it is shifted, it's Israel's responsibility, one, to react to the Arab Spring, by the way, which is also inserted in the speech in a way that is not extremely relevant to the subject, and two, to allow Palestinians to their right of self-determination and to allow them to fulfill their dream, because Europe allowed the Jews to fulfill their own.
Well, do either of you find it odd?
Amazing what you're saying. It's really amazing. I would never have got the idea. By the way, what you said in the beginning concerning Holocaust, and it's never over, and there are sensitivities. Of course, you're right. I fully agree with you. On the other hand, me, as a German, who frequently speaks German, who meets Israelis and who know perfectly well that I am German, I tell them that, I don't hide it or anything, even though I speak perfect Hebrew, etc. The time that Israelis have told me I would not like to talk to you, or I feel uncomfortable or something, that the last time that happened was some 20 years ago. So what I'm talking about is...
I understand, especially that the new generation has much less problems. Of course, now there's a political issue here. Bennett wanted to make a point, and the point was very clear. But if I may add one thing, which is really also clear in this speech, and which is enough of a reason for anyone in Israel to stand up and walk out. When he speaks of responsibility, he never, ever mentions any responsibility on the side of the Palestinians, nor their leaders. In any way are they responsible for their own future and their own destiny. It's only Israel. And whereas it's true that this is a message that is subtle and it's not extremely explicit, anyone who is listening to the speech can fully perceive that Schultz is accusing Israel of everything, and the Palestinians, they have no responsibility whatsoever.
I can confirm, by having been at this breakfast with him, that he talked about, well, if the peace talks fall apart and don't succeed, then of course Israel, with all its settlements, etc., somehow there will not be a boycott. Of course, we are against a boycott, he says, but there will be some kind of sanctions or so. At least most of the Europeans will think like that. And then he said, concerning the Palestinians, he did not say that we will shut down the money or we will not finance them anymore. No, but you must understand, even if the peace talks fail, the Palestinians need infrastructure and the people have to live, etc. I mean, just think how much money the Europeans spent on the Palestinians and compare it to the money spent on Ethiopia, Somalia, or any other country in the world.
Yeah, but it's definitely not a speech that focuses on figures and facts, because if it were, he would have at least verified what he says.
Let's refocus a little on the current relations between Israel and Germany, less about the Palestinian issue, which is obviously a thorny one for the topic of this conversation. Do either of you think that the relations should be different than they are today, that there's room for improvement? Obviously, besides this chapter, besides this incident in the parliament, what's your analysis on the relations today after, this is not a typical history between these two nations, obviously, as we've brought out the topic of the Holocaust?
First of all, the government of Mrs. Merkel is very pro-Israel. I mean, just think of all the boats and military aid, and some of it, much of it is being paid for by the Germans.
Began decades ago already.
Yes, and that is a traditional point of view of the German government. It continues, even though there are some politicians which are somehow critical. And today, the Vice Chancellor, Mr. Sigmar Gabriel, was here in the country a few months ago, and he visited Hebron. And then afterwards said Israel is an apartheid state, which is not politically correct to say. And Israel should recognize the Hamas. So you have problematic politicians there.
You have different elements in play here.
On the other hand, you have quite a lot of youth exchange. You have a lot of cultural exchange. You have some 30,000 Israelis, artists, etc., living in Berlin. And all this makes a lot of impact, positive impact. And even though the media is very critical of Israel, but they publish every day something about this country. So sometimes there are also some positive things among them.
Fixation, you could almost argue.
Yes, in a way.
A fascination, that some have told me, or some would say, certainly. What's your take on the situation now between Germany and Israel?
I would say that there is a paradox going on, because on the one hand, the situation is what it is, the past relationship is extremely difficult, and the memory of the past is still very much alive, and I don't think we can blame anyone on that. And on the other hand, Germany is inside a European Union which is extremely anti-Israel, which is very problematic in its position to Israel, which does not, which has an open double standard towards Israel, and against Israel and pro-Palestinians, and in a way, I guess Germany needs to juggle between all the factors. One is Israel on the one hand, their excellent economic ties, the excellent relationship that there is today, the past, the future, and especially this present of Europe. Again, today I think we had the news of another country forbidding shchita, the ritual slaughtering of animals. Europe is going in a direction which is extremely problematic, both for Jews and Israelis, who are not the same thing, and Germany needs to find its own place in this situation.
And Germany wants to get rid of the shame. It does not forgive the Jews the Holocaust.
Of course.
That is a very famous saying.
Yes.
And, by the way, I just want to correct you in one point. You said Israel and pro-Palestinian. If I check very closely, they are not pro-Palestinian. They are anti-Israel.
Yeah, it's a good point.
That's a slight difference.
It's a good point.
Sometimes goes hand in hand, but
yes.
Not necessarily. What do you think is next after this row yesterday in the Knesset here? Will this continue? Is this going to be an issue that gets put away in the closet now, or is this going to cause more confusion and complication?
Listen, in 2 weeks' time, Mrs. Merkel is going to come to Israel with her whole government. So they have these government consultations, etc. Merkel is a very good and careful politician, according to my experience. Mm-hmm. And I do not believe that she will make any major mistakes.
No gas from her.
And then let's wait another 2 weeks what will happen, and then we'll meet again in the studio.
At that point, potentially. Well, unfortunately, we are running out of time here today, so thank you both for the colorful debate you brought here on the subject. Mr. Ulrich Sahm and Nadia Ellis, thank you for joining us here tonight on the Daily Debate. Well, after the break, we'll be back with One-on-One as we take a look at the conservation efforts taking place in Africa. Stay with us.